Hey folks, I hope you're all well. Just doing a little video to introduce you to the Policy Critical Analysis and Ministerial Minute, which is your second assignment for HSP403. As per usual, I've started with some daggy little graphics. The first step that you need to go through is finding a strategic policy that's important to your workplace in some way. Then you'll need to do a bit of library research and quite a bit of reading to link that policy with the research evidence base to find out whether or not the policy is actually supported by the research evidence. Then you'll need to put it together in your Ministerial Minute template. So we've actually given you a template, so you don't have to think about this. And you put your minute together in the first instance, and then following from that is your supporting documentation. And you need to write that all up using the template. So just a reminder that this is your second UTAS submitted summative assessment, not submitted in the intensive or just after the intensive, as is the case of the presentations and the reflection paper. So this will be your final assignment that UTAS will mark for you. The due date for this assignment is on the Milo site for you. It's 2,000 word maximum, and that excludes your reference list, most importantly. And the weighting of the assessment overall is 20%. So what you're actually doing is you're doing a critical analysis of a strategic or a policy of strategic importance to the organisation that you work for. And it can be addressing any issues related to business or life or whatever, really. They can often be developed out of a specific set of circumstances and sometimes even a particular event. So using the format of a ministerial minute, and you've got the document template provided for you on the Milo site, and then you put together some supporting critical analysis material after your minute. You need to write a critical analysis of a strategic policy of your choice related to your workplace. You need to draw on scholarly current literature to support your different points and reference this using Harvard style. And I've suggested again use the UTAS style because there's a nice guide there for you to use. And you'll need to make sure that you're bringing in national and international research. You'll have to do some searching of government reports as well, websites, all of that sort of stuff. You might even be lucky enough to find evaluations or critiques on the policy that you're focused on, which will be an extra bonus. So this is what you need to do in terms of a series of steps. You read your policy document after you've found it, obviously. Find some sort of context related to the policy from the news, political speeches, organisational documents, whatever. When was it implemented and what purpose was it implemented for? Then you need to go to the databases and find some research about the business or life issue that you're focused on that in the specific policy. After you've done that, you need to write up your response as an analysis of the policy that critically challenges the ideas in the policy. Critically challenging doesn't necessarily mean negative. Sure, there'll be policies where it's very clear that there's no evidence base to support the ideas, but a critical analysis of a policy can mean using evidence to show that it is supported in the evidence base, or using evidence to show that it's not, that the policy is not. So it's just about highlighting how it aligns well or perhaps doesn't align at all with the evidence base around the specific life or business issue that you're focused on with that policy. Then you need to upload your electronic response electronically to the Milo site, and you need to use the template that we provide with your ministerial minute first, followed by your supporting critical analysis material, including your list of references. So you can just add that to the end of your ministerial minute rather than doing it as two separate documents. So in your ministerial minute, you'll need a subject, you'll need to write about your purpose, treat this sort of as an introduction, I guess. Introduce your topic generally, talk about what you're focusing on, then roadmap each section of your supportive analysis material, for instance. Then you need to write up your recommendation. I've given you about 150 words for that. And then background and brief description. Look, these words limits are not set in stone. You can massage them depending on how much you want to talk about. 2 paragraphs at the most for your background and your description. This is where you focus on the policy, what it is, and telling us about the purpose, and include your background context. What does Hansard say if it's been discussed in Parliament? What does the media say about why this was implemented? All of those types of things. So that's your structure for your ministerial minute. Then you've got a basic structure for your supporting analysis material. This is where you critically analyse the document, read the policy document carefully, and bring in the research literature around these forms of documents. So how does the document describe the element of life or business that the policy is focused on? About 400 words for that. What are the key assumptions about the element of life or business that underpin the policy document? And this is not just statements, it's actual assumptions. So think about, for instance, there might be a policy around boot camps for young people. A fairly common assumption that underpins a policy like that would be the assumption that young people don't get enough discipline, or that they're out of control and that they need structure and discipline, and that's why they're implementing boot camps, even though there's no research evidence whatsoever to suggest that they're actually useful. So that the assumption there would be that young people are unruly and undisciplined, and that they need structure and order in their lives. So think about what assumptions are working within that policy document. What is the main strength and the main weakness of how the policy approaches the element of life or business that you're focused on? And then, of course, you've got your list of references using Harvard style as well. That's part of that. So just put references at the top and then list them underneath in alphabetical order. Some general tips for you. Using third-person language is preferred. Reading the wording of the policy that you're focused on is really important. Think about the key areas of the assignment. You might be able to find little quotes which support what you're saying, how they describe the area of life, for example. Find these things in the document, then find research which relates to those things. And I'm happy to check, a list of dot point structure around the different things. I'm happy to check your assumptions to make sure you're on the right track. You made your weakness and strength, but just in dot point form to me in an email is all you need. Make sure you include all the parts of the set task. That some people do overlook certain bits. Be sure to include specific examples from the document, and this is where your quotes might come in quite well. Include at least one reference per paragraph. This is a basic rule that will help to make sure that you've got enough supporting material, but also check the marking rubric in terms of how many references you need to get a high distinction, for instance. And make sure you follow the suggested structure for the task, because it'll help to make sure you've got all the bits in there. I haven't got feedback from previous students, but I do have similar tasks that I've run in the past that might help. The feedback from those tasks might help you to think about this one. Some people don't follow the recommended structure, and that can be a real concern because they add in things that they don't need, or they don't add in things that they actually really do need vitally. So make sure that you think about that suggested structure, and if you've got any improvements or whatever that you want to make, if you want to do something different, get in touch with me. Make sure that I know about it so it's got the okay before you go ahead. Some people use the entire assignment to just describe the content of the policy rather than analysing it. That's a big problem. I'll talk more about how to analyse something in the essays about doing analysis work. Some people don't even describe the policy document at all, or in really general terms. Make sure you've got your section focused on that. Some people don't identify a strength or a weakness. Some people don't use any research literature to support or refute the policy document. This is absolutely vital. Unless you use research literature, you actually won't be doing critical analysis. So make sure that you've got that in there. Some people use subheadings. Some people have poor paragraphing and sentence structure, so not using full paragraphs of 5 sentences or more. Some people have paragraphs of just 2 sentences. You must develop full paragraphs. And some people have follow-on sentences where they have the word however in the middle of 2 sentences. Make sure you read it and proof around that sort of stuff. Some people don't even proofread, including grammar and spelling errors and all of that sort of stuff. Please do that. This is a high-level unit. You need to make sure you're putting forward your best work. Look for referencing errors. You've got guidelines online. It's really easy to follow. Some people miss what we call linking and transition sentences. I talk about this in how to make an argument and all of that sort of stuff. This is your vertical thread, so it's really important that you have that in there. And you'll get feedback from markers saying this is descriptive rather than analytical if you're missing those linking and transition sentences. Minimise your quotes. It's great to pull out quotes that demonstrate the assumption, that young people are unruly or whatever, but keep them to an absolute bare minimum, folks. We can't mark quotes because they're not your work. So the more quotes you have in there, the less of that stuff is your work. Most importantly, in these assignments, some people take critical to mean negative. Critical does not necessarily mean negative. A critical analysis is about looking at the policy you've got and whether or not it aligns with the evidence base. All right, so if you're looking at a boot camps policy, for instance, it's really easy to see that they don't align at all with the evidence base. The evidence base that we've got demonstrates that boot camps are hit and miss at best. The only good outcomes they have is very short term, and as soon as the young person leaves that environment, everything falls away. So the research evidence tells us that boot camps don't work. So we're in that instance, being critical is quite easy because you can just say that the evidence doesn't align with the policy. It's not, the policy is not supported in the evidence base. But there are other really great policies where it's very clear that the evidence base aligns with, it supports what the policy is doing. So critical doesn't necessarily mean negative. Just keep that in mind. What does the marking rubric say? It's pretty straightforward. We're critically discussing underlying assumptions of a policy, evaluating the strength and weakness of a policy. Note that that is not plural. It's one strength and one weakness. That's it. Develop it in detail. So a nice detailed critical discussion of 3 specific underlying assumptions of a strategic policy. And then the response clearly identifies and details 1 key strength and 1 key weakness of a strategic policy with reference to research, literature. In the other area we're looking at is addressing the set task, which is looking at writing, the introduction, your background, supporting critical analysis material, making sure you've got your grammar and spelling accurate, 10 or more references, clear, paragraphing, evident. That's pretty straightforward stuff. And finally, it's about critically considering future policy direction grounded in the evidence base. So what does the research tell us and how does that policy stack up? Clear and focused reflection on areas of future focus around these forms of policy practice. Making sure that you've got something in there that resembles an introduction, a body, and a conclusion is a good idea. And you can split this up in terms of the structure according to the Ministerial Minute briefing template and all of that sort of stuff. So don't get too bogged down with this type of thing. I wanted to give you some example paragraphs. The first one I've picked is one that's focused on detailing an assumption. So second assumption is that all injuries can be prevented. Very, very simple assumption. Then some research literature brought in to show that it's more utopian style thinking and then that's actually not possible. A very prominent criticism is then introduced and that's talked about in a bit more detail. And then we've got a nice linking sentence at the end. Anecdotally, police don't believe all injuries can be prevented. As a result, this assumption is theoretically possible yet challenging to achieve or sustain. top-notch paragraph, because we've got a lovely linking sentence there that takes us back to why the paper's being written overall. Got a nice introduction here, talking a couple of sentences about the policy, then the overall aim, firstly, secondly, thirdly, this response will talk about. Finally, it will conclude that. So that's what we call signposting, first, second, third, finally, all of that sort of stuff. But that's what a nice introduction looks like for you, with good sentence structure and good paragraph structure. And then I've got an example of a conclusion for you as well that just gives you a sense of what you're doing. It's quite similar to the introduction because you're basically doing the same thing. You're summarising your main points that you've overall spoken about in your response, and then you're sort of going, so what for the future? And we can see that here in this one. I do not believe that this policy alone has made police risk averse. Where there is perception of risk aversion, I would argue it's more likely to be well planned, smart policing, etc. So good links back to the overall discussion. Anyway, folks, that's it. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I hope that was helpful for you, and I will chat with you really soon. Laters!